right, so you ready to, like, really get into it?
Mm-hmm.
If you're here with us, I'm guessing you're trying to get better at English.
For sure.
We're going deep on this one.
Yeah.
We're looking at this guide all about the 5 biggest mistakes beginners make.
Yeah, and they're surprisingly easy to make.
It's true. I wish I had this when I first started learning languages.
Really?
Oh, totally. I can remember just spending hours and hours, like, memorizing verb conjugations. But then when I had to actually, like, speak, I would just freeze up.
Oh, yeah.
I'd be like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, that's a great illustration of this first mistake that the guide talks about. Grammar obsession,
Yeah.
which seems kind of counterintuitive, right? You would think that getting the rules down is like the most important thing.
Yeah, I thought that too.
Right.
But it's like if you wanted to win a marathon, but you only ever read about running techniques,
Mm-hmm.
you got to get out there and run.
Exactly.
And with language, that means you have to speak it.
Absolutely. And this guide actually talks about this student who aced every grammar test but couldn't even have a basic conversation.
Wow.
Turns out they were so focused on getting the grammar perfect that they never actually practiced speaking.
Yeah, I can see how that happens.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not about ignoring grammar altogether, but just finding a balance between being accurate and being fluent.
Right, for sure, yeah. It's about using grammar as a tool to help you communicate, not like a bunch of rules that stop you.
Okay.
Think about like a little baby learning to speak. They don't start with grammar textbooks. They learn by listening and imitating and experimenting.
Yeah, good point. So I guess it's about immersing yourself in the language and letting yourself make mistakes.
Sure.
Which brings us to the next big pitfall, speaking shyness.
Yeah. Have you ever felt that?
Oh, yeah,
I think we've all been there.
definitely.
The guide really stresses that speaking is a skill, and just like any other skill you have, to practice it.
Right.
The more you speak, the better you'll get and the more confident you'll become.
Yeah.
You're basically training your brain to actually think in English, not just translate stuff in your head.
I remember when I first started trying to speak Spanish, I was so self-conscious.
Really?
I would overthink every single sentence because I was terrified of making a mistake.
Oh, yeah. I totally get it.
Did you ever feel like that?
Oh, for sure. When I was learning new languages, I get so flustered trying to conjugate verbs and stuff that I totally lose track of what I was even saying.
Yeah.
It's like your brain just overloads, and it can be so overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like stage fright, but for speaking another language.
That's a good way to put it.
But the guide says something interesting. The more you actually speak, the less you have to translate in your head and you start thinking in English.
That's so true.
Yeah.
It's like your brain switches gears from that painful translating to actually thinking in the language.
That's when you know you're like really making progress.
Absolutely.
But, you know, sometimes it's tempting to just rely on those translation apps.
Oh, yeah.
Which brings us to mistake. #3. Over-reliance on translation apps.
Yeah.
I mean, they're so convenient.
So convenient.
How can you resist?
I know, it's tough. But they should really just be used strategically, not like a crutch.
Right.
The guide gives a perfect example of how bad it can be to rely on them too much. Like, imagine if you told someone, "I'm nervous to meet you," when what you really meant was, "I'm excited to meet you."
Oh, no.
Talk about the wrong message.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
So apps are okay for like quick checks or figuring out a menu, but if you want to really learn the language, you have to engage your brain.
Exactly.
Mm.
They're a good supplement, but they shouldn't replace actually learning.
Right. And it can be tough to do that, especially when we're always comparing ourselves to other people, which is mistake, #4. The comparison trap. It's easy to see someone who's fluent and feel discouraged.
Oh, for sure. It's totally natural to compare yourself to others. But it's important to remember that everyone learns at their own pace. Some people might have more time or they've been exposed to the language more.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 20.
Right.
That's a recipe for getting frustrated.
It's true. I used to do that all the time, especially when I would see people online switching between languages like it was nothing.
I get it.
And it made me feel like I was so behind.
But remember, language learning is a personal journey.
Yeah.
It's not a competition. The important thing is to focus on your own progress and celebrate what you achieve.
You're right. It's like comparing a beginner's yoga pose to a seasoned yogi.
Exactly.
They're both on the path, just at different points.
Exactly.
What matters is that you're consistent and you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
And that brings us to mistake, #5. Where's the fun? This is where it gets interesting.
I like this one.
The guide says that a big mistake is forgetting to make language learning fun.
Right.
If you see it as a chore, it just feels like a burden. But if you make it fun and engaging, It's something to look forward to. It reminds me of this story I heard about a student who learned English by watching his favorite TV shows.
Oh, wow.
He was so into the stories that he just absorbed the language without even realizing he was learning.
I love that. That's a great example. Our brains learn best when we're enjoying ourselves.
It's true.
Think about it. When was the last time you memorized something you actually enjoyed?
Oh gosh, all the time. Song lyrics, movie quotes, even those silly memes.
Yeah,
Just sticks in your head.
exactly. So the key is to find ways to add English into things you already like.
Okay.
Whether that's listening to music, watching movies, playing games, or even chatting with friends online.
Yeah.
There are tons of ways to make it part of your life.
It's like switching your thinking from I have to study to I get to experience this.
Totally.
And that can make all the difference.
For sure. So we've gone over the 5 main things that can trip you up on your English learning adventure.
We have.
Now take a second to think what really stood out to you.
Yeah, what really hit home for you?
And think about how you like to learn. What's one thing you can do to avoid these traps and start learning better?
Right. Keep those thoughts in mind as we get into some solutions and strategies in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm excited for that.
Me too. Okay, so we're back. We've talked about those 5 big pitfalls that can mess up your English learning, and now it's time to get into some solutions.
Yeah, we know what not to do, but what about what we should do?
Right, like we've given you the map, but now let's actually figure out how to navigate.
Exactly.
So let's go back to that first one. Grammar obsession. How do we stop overthinking the rules and actually start communicating?
Well, the guide says to treat grammar like a support system,
Okay,
not like it's a straitjacket.
I like that.
Instead of memorizing every single rule, focus on the ones that help you express yourself clearly.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, that sweet spot between being accurate and fluent. Instead of getting stuck in the technical stuff, focus on actually using the language to say what you want to say
Oh.
and connect with people.
So the guide says to start with the present tense.
Yeah.
That seems simple, but it's like the basis of so much of how we talk every day.
It's a great place to start because you can start speaking and practicing right away. You don't need to get bogged down in all those complicated grammar rules.
Right, and you can always build on that foundation as you get more comfortable.
Exactly.
I think it's also really important to remember that making mistakes is just part of the process.
Oh, for sure.
It's not failing, it's how you learn.
Yeah, our brains actually learn best when we try things out and make mistakes.
Huh.
Think about when you were learning to ride a bike. You probably fell a few times.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But each time you got back up, you learned something new, and eventually you were riding like a pro.
I get it. So it's the same with language. You gotta be okay with stumbling a bit.
Yeah, those stumbles are actually moving you forward.
Okay, so what about speaking shyness? We know we have to practice, but how do you actually do that when it feels scary to speak out loud?
The guide talks about creating like low-pressure environments to practice in.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as talking to yourself in English.
I do that sometimes.
Me too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll even like narrate my day in English just to get used to thinking in the language.
I like that. The guide also mentions joining those language exchange groups online
Oh yeah.
or finding a language partner.
Those are great because they give you a safe space to practice with other people who are learning just like you.
It's like having a support group.
Exactly. You can all help each other out, share tips, and celebrate when you make progress.
And I think it's important that everyone there is trying to learn so there's no pressure to be perfect.
No judgment. It's all about encouraging each other.
But sometimes, even if we know that, it's still hard to shake that feeling of being judged.
It can be so paralyzing.
So the guide also talks about positive self-talk.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Instead of beating yourself up when you mess up,
Yeah.
you have to celebrate the progress you make and focus on enjoying the learning.
So true. It's so easy to focus on what we're doing wrong,
Yeah.
but we need to shift our focus to what we're doing right.
Okay.
Like every time you say a new word or understand a native speaker, take a second to acknowledge that and celebrate it.
Like training your brain to be your cheerleader.
Exactly. And remember, even native speakers make mistakes. It's part of being human. Be kind to yourself, be patient, and just keep practicing.
Now let's talk about those translation apps. We know they're not the answer,
Yeah.
but how can we use them without becoming too reliant on them?
The guide says to use them as a starting point, not a crutch.
Okay.
So if you're stuck on a word, use the app to get the general idea, but then try to say the thought in your own words.
So like use the app to figure out where you are, but then explore the area on your own.
Exactly. That makes you actually think in English, which is so important for becoming fluent. And when you do use those apps, Pay attention to the context. A word can mean different things depending on how it's used in a sentence.
Yeah, it's like that classic example, I'm excited to meet you, mistranslated as I'm nervous to meet you.
Totally. Same words, but totally different meanings depending on how you use them.
So don't just copy and paste from the app. Think about what the words really mean and how they work together.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's tackle that comparison trap. It can really kill your motivation.
For sure.
It's so easy to compare ourselves to others, but how do we stay focused on our own path?
Well, the guide says that setting realistic goals is key.
Okay.
So instead of trying to be fluent overnight, break down your learning into smaller goals that you can actually achieve.
So instead of saying, I want to be fluent, you might say, I'm going to learn 10 new words this week.
Yeah. Or have a 5-minute conversation with a language partner. Or watch a TV show in English with subtitles.
Those smaller goals feel way less overwhelming.
For sure. And they give you a sense of accomplishment as you go.
And it's important to celebrate those wins.
Absolutely. Every little step forward is a big deal.
Okay, so now for the fun part. Making language learning fun.
This is my favorite part.
Right. Learning a language shouldn't feel like a chore.
It should be enjoyable.
So think about what you already like to do. How can you add English into those things?
If you like music, listen to English songs. If you're a movie buff, watch English movies. If you love video games, play them in English.
It's about making English part of your life, not just something you study.
Right. The possibilities are endless. Just experiment and see what works for you.
The important thing is to find things that make learning feel like a hobby, not work,
Yeah, and when you're having fun, you're more likely to stick with it.
which means you'll make more progress.
Exactly. So before we move on, take a second to think, what are some things that have really resonated with you today?
Yeah, what are some things you can actually start doing to get better at English?
Keep thinking about those as we go into the last part of our deep dive.
We're back and ready for the final part of our deep dive. We've covered the big mistakes to avoid and some solutions. Now we're going to level up with some extra tips.
Ooh, I like that.
Think of it like the secret ingredients to take your English to the next level. Okay, so the guide talks about active learning. It's not just about absorbing information. It's about really engaging with it.
Right, you have to like wrestle with it.
Yeah, and make it your own.
Yeah.
So instead of just reading something, try to explain it in your own words or talk about it with a language partner. Even try teaching the concepts to someone else.
I like that. It's like watching a cooking show versus actually trying the recipe.
Exactly. You learn so much more when you actually do it yourself.
For sure. The more you use the language, the more natural it will become.
The guide also says to try out different learning methods.
Yeah, because what works for one person might not work for someone else.
Totally. It's like having a buffet of options.
I like that.
Just try different things and see what you enjoy.
Exactly. The guide mentions apps, podcasts, online courses, language exchange platforms.
Right. There's so much out there.
Don't limit yourself.
And don't forget about connecting with other learners.
Oh, that's so important.
Find a language partner or join a group of people who are learning English.
It's so motivating to have that support system.
Yeah, you can all help each other and celebrate your successes together.
Plus, you get to practice with real people, which helps you get more fluent and confident.
It's like having your own personal cheer squad.
Exactly. And speaking of celebrating successes,
Mm-hmm.
make sure you acknowledge your progress.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in what we still need to learn,
It is.
but it's so important to look back and see how far you've come.
It's like hiking up a mountain.
Okay.
You're focused on the top, but you got to stop and enjoy the view along the way.
I like that. Think back to when you first started learning English.
Mm-hmm.
Could you even say a simple sentence back then?
Probably not.
And now look at you.
You've come so far.
It's amazing. Every step matters.
It really does. And that brings us to our last and maybe most important tip. Be patient.
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
I'm not a very patient person, and I used to get frustrated when I didn't see results right away.
It's understandable.
But learning a language takes time.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. There will be times when it feels hard and you want to give up.
But everyone who's learned a language has felt that way.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They've all had challenges and made mistakes. The key is to keep going.
Okay, so it's like learning to play an instrument.
Yeah.
You can't expect to be amazing overnight.
Exactly. It takes practice and dedication. Just trust the process, celebrate your wins, and keep your eye on the prize.
Okay, so to wrap up, those bonus tips are active learning experiment with different methods, connect with other learners, acknowledge your progress, and be patient.
We've covered a lot today,
We have.
but the most important thing is this. You can become fluent in English.
We believe that.
It's not about talent or luck. It's about putting in the effort, having a good attitude, and enjoying the journey.
So get out there, use the language, have fun, and watch yourself become a confident English speaker.
We're cheering you on.
Happy learning, everyone.
See you next time.